She never expected her heart to skip a beat for her son's friend. Claire Miller had stopped believing in surprises. Life, she thought, had already shown her everything. Love that faded, promises that broke, and years that slipped quietly through her fingers. Her days were predictable now. The hum of the washing machine, the smell of coffee at dawn, the long drive to her teaching job, and the silence that filled her evenings. Her son Ethan had gone off to college 2 years ago, leaving her house quieter, lonelier. She told herself it was peace, but it was really emptiness with a polite name. That summer, Ethan was coming home for break and he wasn't coming alone. "Mom," he had said over the phone, his voice bright. "My friend Liam's staying with us for a few weeks. He doesn't have much family around, and his dorm's closed for renovations. You don't mind, right?" Of course she didn't. Claire had always liked when her home was full of laughter again. The sound of footsteps, the smell of food on the stove, the simple feeling of being needed. She just didn't know that this visit would quietly change everything. Sometimes fate doesn't knock. It walks right through your front door. The first time she saw Liam, she almost dropped the tray she was carrying. He wasn't what she expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, but gentle in presence. There was something calm about him, something that made her uneasy in a way she couldn't name. He smiled politely, shaking her hand. "Thank you for letting me stay, Mrs. Miller." His voice was warm, not the clumsy tone of a college boy, but deep and careful, like someone who thought before speaking. Claire noticed his eyes, gray-blue, curious, yet quiet, the kind that watched more than they said. She brushed the thought away and smiled. "You're welcome, Liam. Make yourself at home." The days started normally enough. Claire cooked. The boys laughed, played video games, and disappeared for hours. But every now and then, she'd look up and find him watching her. Not staring rudely, but studying, as if trying to understand something. It unsettled her. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe he was shy. Maybe he missed home. But one afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, she caught that look again. He was sitting at the table, reading something on his phone, when she walked in with a tray of lemonade. The second she entered, his gaze lifted, soft, steady, and searching. It wasn't desire. It wasn't curiosity. It was something else entirely, recognition. Like he saw the part of her she'd buried years ago, the woman beneath the tired mother, the one who still wanted to be seen. She turned away quickly, her pulse stuttering. What was she thinking? He was her son's friend, 22, a guest in her home. She laughed under her breath, embarrassed by her own foolishness. But her heart didn't listen to reason. It just beat louder, like it had been asleep and suddenly remembered how to wake up. It's strange how small moments start the biggest storms. That evening, the three of them had dinner together. Grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, the kind of meal she made without thinking. Ethan talked about his classes, his basketball team, his friends. Claire smiled, listening, but her mind kept drifting. Every time Liam laughed, she felt it. A warmth in his voice, a spark of life she hadn't felt around her in years. After dinner, Ethan went out to meet some local friends, leaving Liam behind to help with dishes. He offered naturally, without hesitation, rolling up his sleeves. His hands moved with quiet ease, and every small gesture, the way he rinsed a glass, the way he thanked her for dinner, felt strangely intimate. "You really didn't have to help," Claire said, drying the plates beside him. "I wanted to," he replied, glancing at her with that same calm gaze. "You've done so much already." The words were simple, but something in his tone made them linger. It had been years since anyone said something like that to her with such sincerity. When the last dish was done, they stood in the soft hum of the kitchen, neither speaking, neither moving. Then he smiled, shyly almost. "You make this house feel alive," he said quietly. Claire froze. "What?" He looked down quickly, embarrassed. "Sorry, it just feels warm. Like home?" She nodded, trying to ignore the sudden rush of heat to her chest. "That's kind of you to say." That night she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her heart felt too full, her thoughts too loud. She wasn't foolish. She knew lines weren't meant to be crossed, but something inside her whispered that it wasn't wrong to feel alive. Not wrong to smile again, to notice someone's kindness, to feel seen. Still, she fought it. She had built a life on control, and this, whatever it was, felt dangerously close to losing it. The heart has a way of whispering even when we cover our ears. The next morning, she found Liam sitting alone on the porch. The air was cool, the sky washed in gold. He was sketching something in a notebook. She didn't even know he drew. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, stepping outside with a mug of coffee. He smiled faintly. "Too quiet, I guess. I'm not used to still mornings." She sat beside him, curious. "What are you drawing?" He turned the page slightly. It was a sketch of her garden. Roses, sunlight, a broken wooden chair she'd been meaning to fix. It was beautiful in its simplicity. "You have a good eye," she said softly. He shrugged. "I just draw what feels alive." Her breath caught for a second. The way he said it, the weight in his voice. Then he looked up at her and smiled, almost playfully. "Guess your garden's alive because of you." It was just a line. A kind one, but it landed differently. Her chest tightened. She couldn't explain why. There was no flirtation, no mischief, only honesty, and that was what scared her most. Because she knew how rare honesty could be. When the soul starts to wake, even silence feels loud. The days began to pass faster. Ethan was out most of the time, catching up with old friends. Liam stayed home more often, helping Claire with small chores, fixing a loose step, trimming the plants, cooking once when she was late. She told herself he was just being polite. But each shared laugh, each small conversation added another thread between them, invisible but real. One afternoon, it rained unexpectedly. They both rushed to bring the laundry in from the backyard. They were laughing, breathless, soaked, when their hands brushed. Just a moment, but in that second, she felt everything. Warmth, life, danger. He looked at her, eyes wide, lips parting as if to say something. But he didn't. Instead, he turned away, folding the wet clothes quietly. That night, she couldn't sleep again. She kept replaying that touch, so innocent yet so charged. She didn't know what scared her more, that he might feel something, or that she did. Sometimes it's not love that confuses you. It's realizing you could still feel it. The next evening, Ethan announced he'd be spending the night at a friend's house. Claire felt her heart stutter at the news, not because of what it meant, but because she immediately thought of him. After dinner, the house was too quiet. Liam sat at the dining table, typing on his laptop. Claire poured herself tea and sat across from him, trying to focus on her book. The air felt strange, thick with unspoken things. Finally, he looked up. "You seem tired," he said softly. "I'm fine," she replied. "Just one of those long days." He nodded but didn't look away. "You shouldn't have to do everything alone." The words hit her harder than they should have. She smiled faintly. "I've been doing it a long time." "I know," he said, his voice low. "But that doesn't mean you deserve to." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world felt still. No sounds, no distance. Just the quiet pulse between two people who weren't supposed to feel this way. Claire stood up suddenly, her pulse racing. "It's late," she whispered. "Good night, Liam." He nodded but didn't reply. She walked quickly to her room, shutting the door behind her. Her hands trembled. Why did he have to say things like that? Why did his kindness feel like a storm she couldn't control? She pressed her forehead against the cool wood of the door, taking a deep breath. She knew she couldn't let this continue. He was young. He was Ethan's friend. She was supposed to know better. But even as she tried to silence her thoughts, a part of her whispered the truth she didn't want to hear. This wasn't about right or wrong. It was about being seen, after years of being invisible. What happens when the silence between two hearts becomes too loud to ignore? The clock ticked past midnight. The house was asleep. Or so she thought. Then, faintly, came the sound of soft footsteps. Slow, careful. Pausing outside her room, her breath caught. She didn't move, didn't speak. The air was electric, heavy with everything left unsaid. A gentle knock followed. Just once. Then his voice, quiet, hesitant, trembling slightly. "Mrs. Miller?" Her heart thundered. She turned toward the door, frozen in place. "Sorry," he said softly. "I just wanted to say thank you. For today." There was a pause, a silence so deep she could hear her own heartbeat. Then, almost in a whisper, he added, "You make this place feel like home." She closed her eyes, fighting the wave of emotion rising in her chest. By the time she opened them, the sound of his footsteps was fading down the hall. But the feeling he left behind stayed. Wild, warm, and utterly impossible to forget. And for the first time in years, Claire knew that something inside her life had just shifted. Quietly, dangerously, beautifully. What do you say when someone sees through you completely? Claire froze in her bed, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Liam's voice still echoed softly outside her door. "You make this place feel like home." Simple words, but they didn't sound simple. They carried warmth, sadness, and something else she was too afraid to name. She waited until the sound of his footsteps faded before breathing again. The house was silent now, but her thoughts weren't. Every corner of her mind buzzed with confusion and something dangerously close to longing. When she woke the next morning, sunlight filled her room. Everything looked normal again. The folded curtains, the ticking clock, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Normal. She clung to that word like a lifeline. She got dressed, fixed her hair, and told herself the same thing over and over. It didn't mean anything. He was just being kind. But when she walked into the kitchen and saw Liam standing there, pouring coffee into a mug, that calm she built in her mind shattered instantly. He looked up, smiled gently, and said, "Good morning." His voice was soft, still a little husky from sleep. She managed to smile back. "Morning," she whispered, trying not to notice the way sunlight hit his face. Too much like a scene she didn't want to imagine. Ethan came down a few minutes later, cheerful and oblivious. "Mom, we're heading to the gym after breakfast," he said, grabbing toast. Liam just nodded, quietly sipping his coffee. Claire exhaled slowly when they left, finally alone again. But that calm lasted only until evening. Some silences feel heavier than words. The day passed in fragments. The ticking clock, the hum of the dishwasher, the soft creak of footsteps upstairs. It was strange how aware she'd become of his presence. Even when she didn't see him, she could sense when he was nearby. When he laughed with Ethan from another room, her heart reacted before her mind did. That night, after dinner, Ethan announced he was going to meet some friends. Claire nodded, pretending not to feel nervous when Liam decided to stay back. The house felt too big for just the two of them. She sat on the couch with her laptop, pretending to read. He sat across the room, scrolling through his phone. "Do you ever miss your husband?" he asked suddenly, his voice gentle but direct. Claire looked up, startled. No one asked her that anymore. It had been years since anyone cared enough to. "Sometimes," she said softly. "But mostly, I miss who I used to be when I was with him, before everything fell apart." Liam nodded slowly, eyes thoughtful. "You still seem like that person to me." She blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're kind. You pay attention to little things. You make people feel safe. That doesn't go away, even if someone stops seeing it." His words hit harder than he probably realized. She turned her gaze to the window, afraid to meet his eyes. "You shouldn't say things like that, Liam." He leaned forward slightly. "Why not?" "They're true." The air between them thickened. She stood abruptly, her voice lower than usual. "I'm going to make some tea. Do you want some?" He smiled faintly. "Sure." In the kitchen, she tried to steady her hands as she poured water into the kettle. Every nerve in her body felt too aware. When she turned, he was standing in the doorway, watching her quietly. His expression wasn't bold or teasing. It was gentle, almost sad. "Did I say something wrong?" he asked. She shook her head quickly. "No, it's just, you don't have to be so kind to me. I'm not— She stopped herself. Not what? He asked softly. She forced a small laugh. Not someone who needs to be reminded she's still worth something. Liam stepped closer, just enough that she could feel his presence. Everyone needs to be reminded of that sometimes. Her breath caught, and for a heartbeat, the world went still. Just the quiet hum of the kettle and the pounding of her heart. She stepped back, needing space, needing air. We should keep things simple, she murmured. He nodded slowly, his eyes soft. Of course, and just like that, he walked away, leaving her standing in the kitchen, shaken, confused, and somehow lonelier than before. The hardest part isn't falling, it's realizing you already have. The next few days passed in a blur. Claire threw herself into routine, grocery runs, emails, cleaning, anything to stay distracted. Liam kept his distance, polite and quiet. But distance only made things worse. The silence between them became its own kind of conversation. Every look they exchanged carried what they didn't say aloud. One afternoon, while Ethan was out, a storm rolled in. The sky turned dark, rain pounding against the windows. The power flickered and went out. Claire sighed, lighting candles on the counter. Just great, she muttered. Liam appeared beside her with a flashlight. You okay? Fine, she said quickly. Just forgot where I kept the matches. He smiled faintly. I found them. The soft glow from the candles made the kitchen feel smaller, warmer. Claire looked up at him, and for the first time she noticed how close he was. Her hand brushed his as they both reached for the same candle. The touch was brief but electric. They both froze. The sound of the rain filled the silence. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Then he took a slow breath. You don't have to pretend, he said quietly. I can see it too. Her throat went dry. See what? That you feel it. The same thing I do. Her chest tightened. Liam, stop. He didn't move closer. He didn't even raise his voice. He just looked at her, calm and steady. I'm not trying to make things difficult. I just needed you to know. Her hands trembled slightly. You shouldn't say that. You're young. You don't understand. He shook his head. I understand enough to know what's real. The thunder outside cracked loudly, breaking the moment. Claire turned away, clutching the counter for balance. You should go upstairs, she whispered. Please, he didn't argue. He just nodded once and left the room quietly. When she finally looked up, the candlelight flickered across the space he had just stood in, and she realized her heart was no longer steady. Some truths feel too heavy to carry, yet impossible to let go. The next morning, she tried to act normal. Breakfast was quiet. Ethan talked about his weekend plans. Liam answered briefly, and Claire pretended to smile. But inside, she was unraveling. Every word Liam said carried a memory of that night. The rain, the silence, his confession. Later that afternoon, Ethan left for work at a local cafe. Claire was in the backyard watering the plants when Liam stepped out onto the porch. He hesitated before speaking. I'm sorry about last night, he said quietly. She looked up, meeting his gaze. You don't have to apologize. I just didn't want to make things uncomfortable, he said. You've been kind to me. I don't want to ruin that. You didn't, she replied softly. It's just complicated. He nodded, walking closer until he stood a few feet away. I know, he said, but sometimes things that feel wrong still make more sense than the things that are supposed to be right. His words made her chest ache. She wanted to tell him to stop. She wanted to walk away, but she couldn't. Not when his eyes looked at her with that quiet honesty again. Not when she realized how much she'd missed being looked at like that. Liam, she whispered. This isn't, he interrupted softly. I know. I just needed you to know that it wasn't a mistake. That's all. The sound of Ethan's car pulling into the driveway broke the moment like glass. Claire stepped back instantly, heart racing. Liam turned toward the house, his voice calm again. I'll go help him bring the bags in. She nodded quickly, trying to steady herself as he walked away. But her hand still shook, her pulse still raced. What had she just let happen? Sometimes running from a feeling only makes it chase you harder. That night, Claire stood by her bedroom window, staring at the faint light under Liam's door down the hall. She told herself this would pass, that he'd go back to college soon, that this was just confusion, loneliness, nostalgia. She almost believed it, but then she heard the faint creak of the hallway floor. Footsteps again, careful, hesitant. Her breath caught. This couldn't be happening again. The knock came softly, barely there. "Mrs. Miller?" His voice, quiet and unsure. She didn't answer. "I didn't mean to cross a line," he said after a pause. I didn't want you to think I was playing games." "I wasn't," her heart twisted. She stayed silent, frozen behind the door. "I'll leave tomorrow morning," he continued. His voice cracked slightly, though he tried to steady it. "It's probably better that way." And then he was gone. Footsteps fading into the dark. Claire leaned back against the door, her chest heavy, her breath trembling, leaving. The word echoed in her mind, sharper than she expected. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft, endless, and strangely familiar. And for the first time, she realized what scared her most wasn't his confession, was how much it hurt to hear that he was leaving. The heart remembers. What the mind tries so hard to forget, Claire thought she'd feel relieved when Liam said he was leaving, but instead she felt hollow. The next morning, she pretended to be busy making breakfast, moving quietly around the kitchen. Every sound, the coffee pouring, the frying pan sizzling, felt too loud in the silence between them. Ethan had already left for work, unaware of the storm quietly unfolding inside his mother's heart. Liam came downstairs with his bag slung over his shoulder. "I called a cab," he said softly. "It'll be here soon." Claire didn't look up. "You could have let me drive you," she said, trying to keep her voice even. He shook his head. "You've done enough already." For a moment, neither spoke. The clock ticked on the wall. The smell of toast filled the room. It was such an ordinary morning. And yet, everything inside her felt anything but ordinary. She finally turned to face him. His eyes were tired but calm, as if he'd already accepted something she hadn't. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For letting me stay. For everything." She nodded, forcing a small smile. "Take care of yourself, Liam." He hesitated, as if waiting for her to say something more, something that would change everything. But she didn't. She couldn't. The cab honked outside. He gave her one last look, long, unspoken, then walked out the door. The sound of it closing behind him echoed through the house like a final goodbye. For a while, Claire just stood there, still, empty. The cup of coffee in her hand had gone cold, but she didn't notice. All she could think about was the sound of his voice when he said her name, and that was when she realized something she didn't want to admit. She missed him already. Sometimes, what's gone doesn't stay gone for long. The next few weeks were a blur of silence. Ethan was back at work, buried in his summer job. Claire returned to her routine, teaching, cooking, sleeping, but her mind wasn't in any of it. The house felt quieter than ever, like it had lost its heartbeat. She'd catch herself looking at the empty chair at the table, expecting to hear Liam's laugh. She'd pass by the porch and think of the mornings they'd sat there drinking coffee in silence. Even the smallest things, the garden, the half-fixed chair, the sketchbook he'd left behind, carried his presence like a shadow she couldn't shake. One evening, as she cleaned the living room, she found his sketchbook tucked under a stack of magazines. She hesitated before opening it. Inside were rough sketches, the backyard, Ethan's car, the porch steps. But on the last page, there was something that made her breath stop. It was a drawing of her. Not perfect, not finished. But it captured something real. Her hands resting on the kitchen counter, a faint smile on her lips, light falling across her face. The title at the top said, "Stillness." Her chest tightened. She traced the pencil lines gently, her eyes blurring. It wasn't just a drawing. It was how he saw her. Not invisible, not forgotten, but alive. That night she couldn't sleep. The image stayed in her mind, pulling at something deep inside. And then, a week later, something unexpected happened. A message. Just one line on her phone. I made it back okay. Hope you're doing all right. Liam. Her heart raced as she read it. She typed a reply, then deleted it, then typed again. Finally, she sent, I'm glad you're safe. Take care of yourself. She waited for the typing dots. They appeared, then vanished. The next day, another message came. The house already feels too quiet without your coffee. She smiled before she could stop herself. That coffee was terrible, she wrote back. Yeah, he replied, but you made it taste better. And just like that, what she thought was over began again. Some connections don't fade. They just find quieter ways to exist. Over the next few weeks, they talked more. Messages at first, then calls. Nothing inappropriate, nothing bold. Just honest. He told her about his internship, the long hours, the people he met. She told him about her classes, the weather, the way the roses in the garden finally bloomed. But beneath every conversation, there was an undercurrent neither could ignore. One night, while she sat on her porch, her phone buzzed again. Liam. I miss the quiet there. Claire. It's still quiet. Liam. Not the same kind of quiet. She stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Claire. You should focus on your work, Liam. You're young. Don't let old memories distract you. Liam. You're not a memory, Claire. Her heart skipped at the sight of her name. He had never called her that before. It was always Mrs. Miller. The way he said Claire, even through a message, felt like a truth she wasn't ready to face. She didn't reply that night, but she read that message again and again until she fell asleep. Days passed. She tried to stay busy, but something had shifted. She caught herself smiling more, humming while she cooked. It wasn't love. At least that's what she told herself. It was connection, understanding, a feeling she hadn't felt in years. Then, one afternoon, she heard a knock on the door. When she opened it, there he was. Liam stood on her porch, holding a small bag, a shy smile on his face. Surprise, he said softly. Claire's breath caught. What are you doing here? He shrugged. I had a few days off. Thought I'd visit Ethan. Ethan. The word was an excuse. She knew it. So did he. Does he know you're here? She asked, trying to sound calm. Not yet, Liam admitted. He's working late, right? She sighed, stepping aside. You shouldn't have come. I know, he said. But I couldn't stay away. The things we run from have a way of finding us again. The house felt alive again. The same, yet different. That evening they sat in the kitchen talking like before. But this time, the silence between their words wasn't empty. It was full. Of memories, of things unsaid, of something that had been growing quietly for too long. At one point, Liam reached for the sketchbook on the counter. You found this, he said. I did, Claire replied softly. It's beautiful, he smiled. I drew it because that's how you looked that night. Peaceful even when you weren't. Her throat tightened. You shouldn't say things like that. He looked down. Maybe not, but they're true. Before she could respond, Ethan's car pulled into the driveway. They both froze. For a moment, the world snapped back into focus. Liam stood up quickly. I'll go put my things upstairs. Claire nodded, her pulse racing. She couldn't let Ethan sense anything unusual. Not now. Not ever. Dinner that night was painfully normal. Ethan chatted about his work, completely unaware of the quiet storm at the table. Claire smiled, nodded, answered when needed. But her mind kept replaying that one look Liam had given her when she'd walked past him earlier. It wasn't longing. It wasn't temptation. It was something deeper. Something that said, I understand you. And that was what terrified her most. When two hearts try to stay apart, life always finds a way to pull them close again. The next morning, Ethan left early. Liam stayed behind to help fix the porch, just like last summer. Claire tried to protest, but he insisted. Let me at least finish what I started, he said. They worked in silence for a while. The air smelled like sawdust and coffee. Then out of nowhere, Liam said, Do you ever wish things were different? She looked up. Different how? He hesitated. That you could start over, live without worrying about what people think. She smiled sadly. Everyone wishes that, Liam. But wishing doesn't change life. He looked at her for a long moment. Maybe not, but sometimes the right person does. The world seemed to blur for a second. The garden, the sun, even the sound of birds faded. All she could hear was her heartbeat. Liam, she whispered, you can't say things like that. Then tell me to stop, he said softly. She opened her mouth, but no words came, because deep down, she didn't want him to stop. And that realization scared her more than anything ever had. Every moment you deny a feeling, it just finds another way to return. The following days were unbearable. Every glance, every silence felt charged. Claire tried to keep her distance, but it was like trying to stop the tide with her hands. Then, one evening, as she was cleaning up after dinner, she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She turned and found him standing there, his expression calm but full of emotion. I'm leaving tomorrow, he said quietly, for real this time. For a moment, the crowd faded. It was just the two of them again, as if time had folded, bringing them back to that first summer, that first look, that quiet understanding. He walked over slowly, his hands in his pockets. You did it, he said softly. You finally showed the world what you see. Claire smiled, tears stinging her eyes. I had a good reason to start again. He looked at the painting, then back at her. You still make everything feel alive. They stood in silence, the noise of the gallery fading into the background. There was no need for explanations. Everything that mattered was already understood. For a moment, it felt like fate had finally allowed them one quiet meeting, not as mother and son's friend, not as forbidden hearts, but as two souls who had found peace in each other's presence. Before leaving, Liam looked at her and said, Maybe the wrong season doesn't matter. Maybe it just means we had to grow first. Claire nodded, her heart calm for the first time in years. Maybe you're right. He smiled, taking one last look at her painting. Goodbye, Claire. She didn't stop him this time. She didn't need to, because this goodbye wasn't an ending. It was gratitude, closure, and something quietly beautiful. As he walked away, the sunlight fell across the painting, the colors glowing brighter, softer, alive. Claire turned back to her canvas, her smile peaceful. She finally understood. Some people don't stay to complete our story. They appear to help us begin again. And though he was gone, she knew one truth that would never fade. He had been the quiet reminder that love doesn't always need forever. Sometimes, it just needs to be real. She nodded, her heart tightening. That's probably best. Yeah, he whispered. Probably. He took a step closer. The air between them shifted. Quiet. Fragile. Can I ask you something? She hesitated. What? If I told you I cared about you, more than I should, would you hate me for it? Her breath trembled. Liam, I just need to know, he said. Because pretending I don't feel it, it's harder than saying it out loud. She looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time, she didn't see a boy anymore. She saw a man, one who carried understanding in his eyes, not expectation. I don't hate you, she said finally, her voice breaking. But that's why this hurts. Liam nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. Then I'll go before it hurts more. He turned to leave, but she caught his wrist, without thinking, without reason. He froze, looking back at her. Neither spoke. The world outside was still, the evening air heavy. She let go first, stepping back, her eyes glassy. Good night, Liam. He stood there for a moment longer, like he wanted to say something, then walked away quietly. And as his footsteps faded down the hall, Claire pressed her trembling hands against her face, whispering the words she couldn't say to him out loud. Don't. Go. But he was already gone. Sometimes, love appears in the wrong season, but that doesn't make it less real. Morning light filtered softly through the curtains, painting quiet streaks across Claire's living room. The silence was heavy. the kind that comes only after something unspoken has been left hanging in the air. Liam was leaving. This time he meant it. There were no uncertain words, no promises to return. Just a final understanding that something beautiful had grown where it shouldn't have, and now it had to end. Claire stood by the window watching as the cab pulled up outside. She didn't cry. She just watched, numb, as he loaded his bag into the trunk. He looked back once. Only once. And in that small glance, she saw everything they'd both been too afraid to say. She forced herself to wave, to smile, to look composed. But her hand trembled. When the car disappeared down the road, she sat on the couch and stared at the empty space he'd occupied for the past few days. The coffee mug on the table, the folded blanket on the couch. The house looked untouched, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Ethan returned a few hours later, cheerful and oblivious.
"Hey, Mom!"
Liam left already? She nodded, her voice calm. "Yeah, early morning." He said goodbye. "Man," Ethan said, shaking his head. "He's such a great guy. I'll miss him around here." Claire smiled faintly. "Yeah," she whispered. "Me too." But that night, long after Ethan went to bed, she found herself sitting on the porch alone. The stars looked cold and distant, and for the first time, she realized how much one person could change the rhythm of her world, simply by being in it. Healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from remembering differently. Days turned into weeks. Claire threw herself into work, determined to keep busy. Her colleagues noticed the change in her. Quieter, softer somehow, but more focused. She taught her students with a new kind of gentleness, as if she understood what it meant to break and still choose to care. At home, she painted again. She hadn't touched her brushes in years, but now, every evening, she found herself at the easel. Her strokes were different, freer, more alive. She didn't plan what she painted. She just followed the feeling in her chest. And one evening, when she stepped back to look at the canvas, she froze. She hadn't meant to, but somehow she had painted him. Not perfectly, not clearly, just a silhouette. A man sitting under sunlight, his face half-turned, the same calm expression she remembered. She stared at it for a long time, her chest tightening. Then slowly she smiled. She didn't feel heartbreak anymore. Just warmth, the kind that comes when something painful turns into something beautiful. Still, she couldn't shake one thought. Where was he now? Was he okay? Did he still think of her the way she thought of him? It was silly, she told herself. He had his life ahead of him. She was part of a memory, nothing more. But even as she said it, her heart didn't quite believe it. Life moves forward, but some people stay quietly in the spaces between. One chilly afternoon, months later, Claire sat in a cafe grading papers. The place was crowded. Laughter, chatter, the clinking of cups. She was focused on her work when a familiar voice made her look up. "Mrs. Miller." She turned. And there he was. Liam. He looked older somehow, sharper features, a calm confidence in the way he carried himself. But his eyes were the same, that same steady blue-gray that had once made her heart stumble. For a moment, they both just stood there, stunned by the sight of each other. Then he smiled. The same quiet, gentle smile she had never forgotten. "Liam," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged lightly. "Work brought me back to town for a few days. I wasn't sure if I should reach out, but when I saw you sitting here, I couldn't just walk past." Her pulse quickened. "You could have." He smiled softly. "You know I couldn't." They sat together, awkward at first, two people pretending to be strangers, but tied by something far deeper. They talked about simple things, his job, her classes, the weather. But beneath every word, there was that same quiet current neither could ignore. When the cafe began to empty, he looked at her and said, "You look happy." She smiled. "I'm learning to be." He nodded. "You were always stronger than you thought." His words touched something deep in her. For a long time, no one had seen her that way. She realized that no matter how much time passed, he still looked at her with the same understanding. the kind that made her feel visible again. When they said goodbye outside, there was no grand gesture. Just a gentle moment, the kind that stays long after it's gone. "It was good to see you," she said softly. "You too," he replied. "Maybe someday we'll meet again when the timing's right." She nodded, even though she didn't believe in timing anymore. Then he walked away, again. But this time she didn't cry, because deep down, she knew something had shifted. Their story wasn't over. It had just changed its shape. Some goodbyes don't end stories. They begin quieter ones. The following months felt lighter. Claire's paintings grew brighter, her smile more natural. She started teaching art again, something she had once given up. Her students adored her, not just for her talent, but for the calm way she saw beauty in small things. One afternoon, she got a letter, an actual handwritten letter. The return address made her heart skip. It was from Liam. She opened it carefully. "Claire, I don't know why I'm writing this, but I guess some things are easier to say on paper. I'm doing well. Work's good, life's good, but I miss that quiet you always had around you. You once told me that peace is something we create, not something we find. I think I understand that now. I wanted you to know that you changed me. You taught me kindness doesn't have to come with reason, and love doesn't have to be loud to be real. I'll always be grateful for that. I hope you're painting again, and if you ever hang one of your works in a gallery, I'll be the first in line to see it. Yours." Liam. Claire held the letter for a long time, her eyes glistening. It wasn't a love letter, not in the romantic sense, but it carried something much deeper: gratitude, tenderness, and the kind of affection that outlives distance. That night, she placed the letter on her desk beside her newest painting, a picture of a sunrise over the garden. In the corner, barely visible, was a figure sitting on the porch, sketchbook in hand. She smiled. He had left, but his presence lingered, not as pain, but as light. Some stories don't need endings, just understanding. 1 year later, Claire's art was displayed in a small local exhibit. The gallery was full of people admiring her work, the walls alive with color. Her painting, Stillness, hung in the center, inspired by that sketchbook, by that quiet summer, by everything she had once felt and feared. She was talking to a reporter when she felt a familiar gaze on her back. She turned and froze. Liam stood across the room, watching her with that same calm smile.